Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to our next Now You Know series, Redistricting and Democracy Legislation Updates. My name is Farrain Griffith, and I'm the community organizer for civics and community empowerment at the Office of New York City Public Advocate, Jemani D. Williams. Tonight, we have some experts that's going to share some important information for you. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But before they introduce themselves, I'd like to thank our partners, the New York Law School, Common Cause New York, and the Educated Voter, excuse me. So first we'll hear from Jeffrey Weiss will introduce himself, followed by Susan, and then followed by Nicole.
So we're ready to start?
We are live. Let's hit
Okay.
it.
Well, good
Introduce
evening.
yourself.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Weiss. I'm a professor at New York Law School, where I direct the New York Census and Redistricting Institute, a not-for-profit, nonpartisan information and resource center on everything related to redistricting, census, and voting rights in New York State. I'm a veteran of several New York State legislative, congressional, and state legislative redistricting rounds, as well as having worked across the country, but especially in the last 2-3 years in counties, towns, cities across the state, and particularly for people watching this program, counsel to the New York City Districting Commission. I'm going to talk about the process. Basically, why are we here today in February 2024 discussing redistricting? Usually this is something that takes place once every 10 years after the census and is completed before the next election after the census, or generally should have been completed in 2022, yet we're here 2 additional years out with the question hanging over us as to whether there will be a new congressional map. So let me give you a little bit of history and background on this.
Before you do that, if we can hear before you get into all of the redistricting, all of the things as they say, we want to get all of the introductions first.
Okay.
So yes. So next we'll hear.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
No worries. I know you like what you do. You want to get right into it, and we want you to
Okay,
get right into it.
I'll reclaim my time afterwards.
Okay, so next we'll hear from Susan Lerner. She'll introduce herself, followed by Nicole Yearwood.
Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause New York. We are a group that works for an effective and inclusive democracy. We work on elections, we work on redistricting, we work on anti-corruption, public finance, and ethics issues. And I'm excited to talk about the potential achievements for the 2024 legislative session in Albany.
Thank you so much, Susan. Next, we'll hear from Nicole Yearwood.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Yearwood. I'm founder and CEO of Educated Voter, the website educatedvoter.net, Educated Voter NY on all social media platforms. And really, my goal is to educate the everyday person on the importance of voting and showing them how to kind of get engaged and involved in the process. I try to post, nationwide information. Of course, New York is my home. So I'm partial to New York. So sometimes there's a little bit more about what's going on locally than nationally. But on my website, I feature links and resources to all 50 states' official voting information. So we want to just make sure that people understand how government affects them and where they can get involved, whether they want to do something hyper local or if they want to get engaged on a larger level, want to help people do that. Because I think civic engagement is extremely important and we all should play a role in our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So, Jeff, did you reclaim your time? You ready to rock and roll?
Okay, so I'll get back to the very
So
basics.
if you can just back up just a little, because I don't know if they quite heard you, but if you can just explain what is redistricting and
Sure.
why do we even have this process?
Okay, well, we're going to start with the U.S. Constitution from the 1790s. The Constitution calls for a census once every 10 years to take a head count of all persons residing in the United States, and that those numbers then allocate congressional districts among the states to the U.S. House of Representatives. That process, the reallocation of districts among the states, is called a reapportionment. New York State now has 26 of the 435 congressional districts. Back during World War II, New York had 45 congressional districts, and now we're back down to 26 districts, the same number we had in the 1820s. So it's a zero-sum game. The census is overwhelmingly critical, but we have to live with the numbers that the Census Bureau provides. And at the end of 2020, actually in 2021, because of the pandemic, it was determined that New York State received 26 districts for Congress. Had New York counted about 90 some odd more people, we would have kept a congressional district. Instead, Minnesota had a bit of a surplus, and we ended up losing a district. So that is the basis is the U.S. Constitution. New York State law also requires a redistricting, but every 10 years, the boundaries of congressional, state legislative, city council, town board, all these lines are redrawn. That's called redistricting. So, real quick, reapportionment allocates 435 congressional districts among 50 states. Redistricting is the actual drawing of the lines within the state. And up until 2014, or through the last cycle, New York's districts were drawn by the state legislature as a simple bill with the governor's approval. It was the traditional three people in the back room situation where the legislature essentially drew seats for themselves. And come 2014, a constitutional amendment was adopted by the voters. We don't think the very best amendment, but one that was crafted by then Governor Cuomo and his allies, mostly on the red side of the aisle in Albany, that created what was called the Independent Redistricting Commission, or as some of us call it, the so-called or allegedly Independent Districting Commission. But for the last round, starting in 2020, a commission of 10 people, 8 of them appointed by the state legislative leaders and 2 then selected by the 8 commissioners themselves, are tasked with recommending to the legislature up to 2 sets of maps for the legislature and for the congressional districts. In the amendment also included criteria, rules, compact districts, contiguous districts, districts that respected minority voting rights, that didn't favor or disfavor political parties or candidates, just a set of rules that were basically put in there, not in any prioritized order, unfortunately, but nonetheless were included. So just to recap really quickly, because we don't have that much time, in 2022, the commission could not agree on a plan. 10 members of the commission, you need 7 of the 10 to agree on a map to send to the legislature, although maps with the most votes from the commission could also be submitted. So come late January 2022, for the Congress and the legislature, the commission submitted an A plan and a B plan. For the legislature, Senate, and Assembly, and for the Congress. One plan was Democratic, one was Republican. The legislature rejected both maps, and at that point, the commission was tasked with going back to the legislature with a second map. Now we're looking at late January, early February 2022. And at that point, the commission basically imploded. They could not get along. Commission being 5-5 Democrat Republican, just couldn't get anywhere with a lot of finger pointing back and forth. At that point, the legislature picked up the pen itself and enacted new congressional and state legislative maps. And later, the same day that the governor approved the bill, a lawsuit was filed in Bath, New York, and Steuben County. In that court action, the courts ended up saying that the legislature had no power to pick up redistricting after the commission imploded, because the commission was required to submit a second set of maps to the legislature before the legislature could then, in a third go around, draw the map itself. So in 2022, a state court based in Steuben County drew the congressional map and the state Senate map, the maps that are still in place today and that were used in the 2022 elections. The assembly was not contested in court, and essentially because of a bipartisan deal that the Democrats and Republicans, cut, and both parties liked their lines, but the 2022 elections were used on the court map for the Congress and the Senate map, the court map for the Senate, and the legislature's own map for the Assembly. The courts did say, however, that had the Assembly been challenged, it too would have been rejected for the failure of following the correct process. And real quickly, the Assembly was subsequently challenged. And in 2023, last year, the commission was directed to go back to work and develop a second plan to submit to the legislature. That plan was accepted by the legislature and is now in place. So the legislative plan, the assembly plan actually followed the state constitutional criteria. But what happened along the line with all of this is that a separate lawsuit was filed. It's called Hoffman versus Commission in late 2022, 2023, that argued that the court-drawn plan in 2022 for the congressional districts was a temporary plan, that it was still the responsibility of the independent commission, the IRC, I'll refer to as, had to go back to work and submit that second map to the commission. Republicans and others argued that that the court map should have remained in place for the decade, but come December of last year, just a month and a half ago, the State Court of Appeals ruled that it is the legislature's job to draw maps based on recommendations by the commission, and that the commission needed to go back to work and produce a second congressional map. That map needs to be submitted to the legislature no later than February 28th. At that point, the legislature can accept the map with no amendments. And if it rejects that map, then the legislature can draw a map of its own, possibly subject to some criteria, but I'm not going to get into that unless we have more time later. Just some minor details that that relate to how much the legislature can change the map from what the commission submitted. Now, the State Board of Elections has announced that petitioning for the 2024 primary, which takes place in June, should begin on February 27th. That's one day before the commission's deadline. Here we are in almost the first week of February with no action by the commission. Things need to move very quickly this month, because if, let's just say, the commission meets next Monday and votes on a plan or submits a set of maps to the legislature and also the commission needs to notice the meeting in advance, which means it's going to take 2 or 3 days before they can actually hold the meeting. So we're really looking at a process where a meeting could take place by the commission as early as, let's say, next week, with action by the legislature the following week. The legislature, if it rejects that map, if it ever receives one, could then redraw the map of its own. But this is taking us very, very close to the February 27th, 28 deadlines. And if those deadlines aren't met, the legislature does have the power to change the petition process or to change the primary. Nobody is in favor of that, but being realistic, that could be a possibility. So
with that being said, how would that impact, with all of that you just said, how would that impact the New York City New York State residents and voters, that redistricting, that going back the second time, not having things put in place, a possibility that you just mentioned, a possibility of even changing the federal primary, pushing it back. If I
Yeah.
recall, they did that with the state senate in 2022. They moved that from June, and because of the process, it ended up being pushed back to August.
Well,
So, like,
that
right. So
really
how would that
depends.
impact? How would that impact? How would this process that's happening that we're waiting on right now? How will it impact New York State, New York City residents and voters?
Well, it could have a major impact depending on where you live. The district boundaries are likely to change. That means if you live in District X today, you might live in District Y tomorrow. That makes it difficult for candidates and for challengers, for the boards of elections, for everybody to really know what district they're running in, where they're going to campaign, where they're going to gather petitions from, how the county boards of elections are going to prepare for the primary. It's a lot of work. There could be a lot of confusion. People had a different member of Congress 2 years ago. They've had one now for the past 2 years, and they might have a different one coming in for next year. Friends of mine who did not like being in CD3, the one that George Santos was representing, or might be glad he's gone, but they were hoping, how did we ever get stuck in this district? And each district has to be of exactly the same population. New York's districts include about 770,000 people per district, and they vary in size from each other by literally one person. So it's a very precise mapping process. People who live on one side of a street may be in a different district from the other side of the street. Communities that prefer to be kept intact may end up being split. The rules for Congress are very precise in terms of the difference in population. So unlike for the Assembly and for the Senate, which can have larger differences, so there could be an impact on people, on who represents them, who they're going to vote for. Issues like that. This isn't the first time that New York has had changes this often. It goes back to the 1960s, where there were about 4 or 5 different plans throughout the decade, but that's a whole generation ago. And for viewers watching tonight, I'm not sure how many of you were around 50 years ago to go through that process. But once you settle in with a member of Congress that you like for the decade, even after a census and lines are changed again, change might be inevitable. And this also leads to where New York fits into the national big picture. We are
That's the big question.
we're now 2 years past when this should have been completed, and so many states are still in court. The Republicans now have just a handful of seats of a majority with 3 vacancies. So if you flip 2 or 3 or 4 seats, the Democrats can pick up in November. That is a huge game changer in terms of who will control the House of Representatives. Because this is a zero-sum game, because each district matters to both the Republicans and the Democrats nationally, these court battles are being fought across the country. We've recently seen Democratic pickups in states like Alabama and Louisiana over Voting Rights Act violations that caused new majority Black districts to be created in those 2 states. In North Carolina, it could be expected, where Republicans control the process, that there could be a pickup there of 3 districts. In Georgia, although the legislature was directed to draw a new majority Black district over a Voting Rights Act violation, that state is likely to still maintain an overwhelming Republican majority. So the nation, all eyes are looking towards places like New York, possibly Wisconsin. There are cases ongoing also in Arkansas, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Wisconsin. But New York is the next one up. Some of the press pundits are predicting or projecting that New York's Democrats can pick up 6 districts in a redrawn map. And that might be a far stretch that could actually throw the whole process back into court over partisan gerrymandering allegations or favoring one party over another. We have to really wait and see what the commission does, what the legislature does. There's no reason that the legislature and the commission themselves can't draw a fair and equitable plan that follows the state criteria that may end up favoring one party over another in, let's say, 1 or 2 or 3 districts. But if either party anywhere in New York ever draws a map that purposefully is drawn to favor or disfavor an incumbent elected official or a political party, and that runs afoul of the state constitution. That's what got the congressional plan in trouble 2 years ago, despite the fact that in 2022, Democrats would have lost under any map. And it's very hard to predict what's going to happen this November. But let me just leave it that if a new map is drawn this year, and Democrats are projected to pick up districts, it really is going to get down to a few other factors of turnout. It's going to get down to the issues and how well candidates themselves campaign. So redistricting sets the base for how districts may be won or lost, but inevitably, with the stakes as high as they are this year, there are going to be a lot of factors in play.
So with all of that being said, we want to hear from Miss Educated Voter herself, Miss Nicole Yearwood, to see how can New York City, New York State residents get involved in this process, why this process is important to the everyday New Yorker. I want to thank you, Jeff Weiss. Always, he's a great at what he does. He knows this redistricting like he knows his name. And if you want to reach out to him, you can reach out to him at his website, www.nyls.edu. Thank you so much. Nicole, if you may, I would like to hear, now Jeff just mentioned a whole lot of stuff. He kind of breezed over the Congressional District 3, breezed over it, why that is happening, how he mentioned it's going to impact where people live at and those things. But I want to get deeper. I want you to get deeper so that the voters and New York residents at large can understand, because you don't have to be a voter to participate in the census. The redistricting is about people. So I want you to go into, if you can, just how this redistricting can really impact New York State residents' quality of life, such as education or housing and in those areas.
So sure, glad to do it. And just starting with, how can the everyday citizen get involved in this process? I think, what I like to do, and I love hearing, from Jeff, and we're gonna hear from Susan later, listening to them, and we really, really get into the weeds. And a lot of times the average citizen says, that's a lot for me. I don't really get it. And that's fine. But there is a way for the everyday citizen to participate, and you should participate. Because what I find is that a lot of people think that government and these processes are happening separate and apart from them. But they actually have a role to play, and they are impacting our daily lives, even though we don't realize it. So, one way to get involved, the first thing to do is redistricting is tied to the census data. Who fills out the census? We do. So every household is receiving a census form, or in 2020, they received a card with instructions to go online to complete the decennial survey. And I'm being specific about that because the Census Bureau conducts other surveys. They conduct about 130 other surveys in addition to the one that we do every 10 years. But the one that we do every 10 years that ends in the years that end in 0 is specifically tied to redistricting. And redistricting is tied to our legislative districts. So that's city council, state senate, state assembly, and our House of Representative members, right? But it is also directly tied to the distribution of federal funding for more than 350 programs. I'm going to say that again, 350 programs. So again, you might still be wondering, okay, well, what does that have to do with me? Why do I need to do this census? If you have children in college, in school at any level, right? Census numbers are used to fund Pell Grants and student loans, school lunch programs as well, pre-K programs. So let's say, for instance, we're not counting all the kids. And in New York City in particular, we have an issue where we have overcrowded classrooms. And that's because children under the age of 5 are historically the most undercounted population in the census, aside from historically underrepresented populations for reasons that we won't get to in this hour. But those are the most undercounted. So it's no wonder that our schools, especially our pre-K programs, we don't have enough resources to properly educate our children. So we can start there. We want to talk about emergency services. Census is tied to police, fire, EMS. Census data is also tied to community development block grants. But if you just simply Google census and federal funding, you will see the more than 350 programs that this data is used to determine how resources are sent to our state and then our cities every single year for the entire 10-year period. So while I mentioned that the census, they do other surveys, that census, once that's decided after the decennial in particular, we can't make any edits. There are no adjustments made after that year, after the survey that they do in the year ending in 0. So they'll do those other surveys and they'll find out maybe where they missed some people, but they won't make adjustments to the federal funding formula. So this is money. Unemployment insurance is funded based on census data. Again, I mean, I could go on. It's a very long list. Again, 350 plus programs. I mean, funding for healthcare, AIDS healthcare. I mean, you will be surprised looking at this list how much census data is tied to federal funding. When we talk about housing, you mentioned housing. Section 8 vouchers also funded based on census data, a federal program. So again, just continuing and doing our part, right? Now, not saying that we have to all be like Jeff, who just spoke, or like me, who is, we're in the weeds daily, but make sure that when you receive that census survey in 2030, that you complete it. Okay, so we'll say that. In terms, so I think I hit on all your points, education and housing as well.
Yes, I
I
have
don't
two
know.
more. I have two
Two
more
more
for you.
questions? Okay,
I have two more points for you to hit on.
sure.
We did mention, well, Jeff, he skated over it, and you mentioned a little bit on the Congressional District 3. Now, someone was removed, right? The former George Santos was removed. But so what's happening right now?
So, in terms of Congressional District 3, we are right now in the middle of a special election. We're in the middle of the early voting period in the special election, actually, not just in Congressional District 3, but also in Assembly District 77 in the Bronx. So, we have a special election, and that's the West Bronx. I'm going to say it's Concourse. I don't remember all the areas, but I do know it's
Yeah,
Concourse. And Farain, I know you're a
High
Bronx
Bridge, yeah,
girl.
yeah. High Bridge,
Yes,
Claremont, Morrisania Heights.
yes. And if you live in that area and you are a registered voter, the great thing about special elections is anyone can vote, any registered voter. So it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, whatever, you conservative, no party affiliation, you can participate in a special election. Going back to Congressional District 3, that's Queens and Long Island as well. So small part of Queens, and then it goes into Long Island. Again, special election, all registered voters can participate.
Now, someone just posted, and that looks like one of our civic sisters, Marilyn Joseph. She just shouted you out and said, "Thank you so much for mentioning the special election in the 77th Assembly
Of
District in the
course.
Bronx because people are not coming out to vote. Yes, it's only day 4.
It's
This
less than
is
100 people.
four.
The last, and I'm actually going to post a little bit later this evening. I'm going to do an Instagram reel showing the cumulative total for the early voting. It was under 100. I think it was at maybe 70, and that might be on the higher end, but it's under 100 voters that have turned out in that assembly district
She
election.
says only 80 people have voted to
Right,
date. Out of 4
right.
early voting days, only 80 people have voted in a district that is 175,000. 100, no, two. The assembly district is
I don't have the exact number in front of me of the number in the assembly district, and I'll get it for the next segment so we can tie that up,
okay.
or Susan might, but not just the number of people who are living there, because it could be people that of non-voting age, etc. But a lot of times there are at least 80 or 90,000 registered voters in a district, and they're not participating in the elections. And these determine, right? So again, going back to the redistricting process, Jeff mentioned that at a certain point, it's going to be in the hands of the state legislature. We elect them. So again, another way we can get involved in these processes on the most local level is participating by voting, participating by completing the census. The other thing, and I probably will say more about this after Susan speaks, is really getting involved after you vote as well. And working with your local elected officials. And if you don't have time, right? A lot of people say we don't have time. We're making ends meet. I'm gonna touch on that as well, making ends meet. That you can at least follow them on social media. I feel like there's always this disconnect between, how we use social media and the internet, for any other random thing. And then when it comes to our government, people say, oh, well, I don't know who my elected officials are. And I'm like, you can Google them if you don't, and find them. And so, let's use the tools we have, and then once you begin to follow them, you'll find out, you'll learn and stay up to date on what it is that they're doing on your behalf. Because they're still, even if you don't vote for them, if you live in their districts, they still are representing you in their government.
So the last thing before we bring on Susan to get into the democracy legislation package, are there any events that are coming up that people can get into, participate? Because I know Jeff just mentioned the process is starting again, but they're not doing the hearings. Are there any upcoming events that people can participate to make sure their voice is heard, to represent their community, whatever that community looks like? If it's on the faith side, whether it's on the senior side, whether it's on the demographic, like, if you want to share that, or ethnicity, like if you want to share any upcoming events that people need to be aware of so they can get involved before this process ends on the so-called February 28th.
Right. Yeah, and it's crazy that it's ending this quickly and that it's going on this long, because technically we should have been done with this in I think 2022 at the latest. The process should have concluded. So and actually, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because in the first part, when we originally did the redistricting process, there were hearings across the state. These hearings are another way that the average citizen can get involved in the process and talk about their communities and keeping communities together, because people are taking the data and they're drawing districts, and people will find that the person across the street that they could work with in the past, let's say they had an issue, sanitation, park issue, they might have worked with them. Maybe now that person is in a different district, right? And it's all because of redistricting. So during the process, you could attend hearings. Unfortunately, this round of redistricting, there's no public meeting. But there's a coalition of organizations that have come together, and they are actually hosting they calling it the People's public hearing on New York State redistricting, and it's taking place next Thursday, February 15th, from 6 to 8 p.m. And so you'll be able to, I think you can watch virtually or sign up to testify. And I think that what I'll do is I'll share the flyer. I'll definitely share it on my social media platform. And I'll make sure that the public advocate's office has it as well. And we make sure. So if you see information like this, please share it, like it. We all know how social media works. We need to generate activities on the post so that it can have the reach that it needs to, so more people can see it. But it's important that we begin sharing the information that we all know. So again, I'll post it. I'm sure the public advocate's office will post it as well. But that is Thursday, February 15th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. That is your opportunity as an everyday citizen to have your voice heard in this next iteration of the redistricting process.
Thank you so much for that. And if there's a link, to register or whatever, you can post that.
I'll drop the link. Yes.
Thank you. And oh Lord. I think Susan fell off the live stream. Hold on, because we need to hear about those all of that democracy legislation that just got passed. I think we wait a little bit. Yeah, she got disconnected. The beauty of being live. Her live stream dropped off. She dropped off. Well, you can take this time, Nicole, and you can mention, you can talk about how important it is. Susan is going to talk about the democracy legislation package that was just passed by the state Senate, waiting to be passed by the state assembly, and what she's going to go into specific legislation that is really key. Like it was a whole bunch, and I'm not saying they all are not, but there's some that are, I guess, a little bit more important that we were waiting for, that's going to help us with the democracy. Would you like to share anything just on the process of how people can get involved with getting bills passed? Because that's another thing. People don't realize that it is the voters, the people, the advocates, excuse me, not voters, the advocates that push for legislation. Like they don't realize it's the coalitions that out here, they're the ones who are pushing for legislation.
So as I'm working to post the link for next week's the people's hearing for next week. Give me a second. But sure, no, and I was like, I definitely don't want to steal Susan's thunder, but yes, the advocates are the ones, entities like Common Cause, like the Center for Law and Social Justice. But you don't have to be an organization to advocate for anything. You can advocate as an individual. And when we say that, and I know a lot of times people feel, because they wonder well, what do you mean? They don't understand that whether you vote or not, that elected official still represents you. So you have the right as a citizen, because we call them elected officials, we call them politicians, but at the end of the day, they are public servants. They are public officials. So you can contact their office. You can ask them their position on any particular issue. You can actually suggest something. I mean, I love telling people, engage with your elected officials. Always, I tell them to be respectful, because I've seen it go the other way. Understanding that they have to represent an entire district with a ton of different interests, but you can work with them on these things. And so as an advocate, I tell, like, your voice is important. Even as one individual, your voice can be critical to a conversation. You can bring a perspective that someone else did not think of. And particularly around voting, and there's been so many changes that have been discussed recently. One of the changes that that comes to mind immediately is that now you can register to vote 10 days before an election, which advocates fought for that, right? And imagine, prior to that, you had to register, I believe it was 25 to 30 days before an election. So there's more time. Something else that advocates push for, and I know there's been some changes. I don't remember the exact ones around absentee voting, and your ability, what you need to do that, because people got used to, when we had COVID, when COVID was and we had the shutdowns, more people were able to vote absentee because the rules were relaxed. But that was just a temporary thing, right? Before COVID, you had to have an excuse that you were going to be out of your county of residence where you're registered to vote. You were not going to be available, and so you had to have a reason to vote, which kind of became vote by mail and vote absentee. And so there were changes, there were laws around that, that was updated as well. I don't remember exactly, so I know, Farain, you're familiar with the laws around absentee voting that changed most recently.
Yes, the deadline, we're in, what year are we in? 2024. That ended for the absentee vote, and that actually ended December of 2022, December
Right.
31st of 2020. That's when it expired, that temporary um, thing, a law that was put in by the former governor. And then it was reinstituted, re-signed, excuse me, by the current governor. Yeah, so but the law itself, it expired December 31st, 2022. You know how we get at the beginning of the thing. It was like, was it this year? No, it was a whole year ago. So now things are being put in place, and Susan will go over that about why it's important to get this legislation, and what does democracy look like? What does democracy really look like here? I mean, nationally, and here specifically in New York State. And it's through these legislation, just having more access to the ballot. Like, how do we get that? And it is through, as you said, you can be an individual, you can be a coalition. I mean, before coming to the office here, I was part of that coalition to get that early voting. Like, I vote early voting all the time. I don't want to be subjected to just one day to vote. I want to vote when I feel like it. So, so yes, anybody can get involved in helping better democracy in the state of New York and nationally. But again, we speaking here to the state of New York. Um, I know Susan is still having technical difficulties. Um, she's still having a little technical difficulties. The
I mean, I could also touch on just just the importance of participation and voting as well. I mean, I know that she's going to talk more specifically about legislation, but just something that recently occurred, and I meant to post about this, and it got away from me. I still will probably say, opine on it just a little, but I think that, I'm talk about the make ends meet, because I want to make sure she has time to rejoin. But a lot of times, people talk about how busy they are, and we understand that our communities, our folks are busy. They may be working multiple jobs. But at the beginning of this year, right, and this is really the importance of voting in all elections,
right.
and the importance of all of your elected officials. I present on this topic, and I tell people, you have 15 or 16 people representing you. If you're a New York City resident, at least 15 people are representing you in government right now, right? And I talk to them about city, state, federal officials. Can you imagine 15 or 16 people? And folks don't know who they are. That's the kicker, is it you don't know who these people are. So, and the importance of participating in each election. So I'm gonna talk about minimum wage. We're
Okay.
gonna get to make ends meet. We have
That's
a
what people want to know. That's what they want to know about. New Jersey just raised theirs. We want to know about the minimum wage.
okay.
How does it impact one? How does it impact us?
Well, let's talk about how we get one, right? It's really how we get one, because people love the hike in minimum wage. That's the best news. People love hearing that news, right? In New York State, the minimum wage increased because of our state legislature and our governor, right? We have a different minimum wage, not because of the federal minimum wage. The federal minimum wage has been $7.25 for at least a decade, if not 2 decades. But incrementally, New York City, our city council and our mayor, they implemented, there was a fight for 15. So our minimum wage has been above $15 for years in New York City and New York State, while the federal minimum wage is still at $7.25. And so that's just an example of, we're talking about helping people make ends meet. It's your city elected officials in New York and your state elected officials in New York that made sure that our minimum wage is increasing while the federal minimum wage still remains at $7.25. And so that's kind of the short of, this is why it's important to vote for all your elected representatives, not just the president every 4 years. And I'll stop there. I think Susan has rejoined us, and I'm going to yield the rest of my time to her afterwards. So thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you so much for all of that, Miss Educated Voter herself, Nicole Yearwood. If you can always reach out to her. We'll drop the link in the chat. If you want to reach out, follow her on social media. She's going to post all of that. You can get more info at info@educatedvoter.net.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So we will be hearing back from you. Okay. So we're going to hear about, now Nicole touched on, how people can get involved with pushing for legislation and why it's important. So now we're going to hear from Susan Lerner, Executive Director at Common Cause New York, who will go over this has got to be the biggest democracy package that they passed. There is so much legislation, so many bills in here to advance us voters into the 21st century, right? So the 21st century, because we were way back. Some of these bills have been sitting on desks for a long, long time. So we want to make sure that voters are aware of the changes, because they're changes, they're going to impact you. So Susan, if you can begin with what does democracy mean to you? What does democracy mean to you?
Democracy to me means the ability to have my concerns, my community's concerns, heard by my government. That I have the ability to talk to my elected officials, that I have the ability to choose my elected officials. I can hold them accountable to be sure that they are adopting policies that are going to benefit the maximum number of New Yorkers, and that they are responsive to the people who elect them. And, Farine, elected officials keep track of who comes out to vote. So when a community has a big turnout for an election, the elected official, legislator, mayor, member, city council member, who's elected by that district is aware of the fact that the voters came out and voted. They're also aware when people don't come out and vote, and they figure they can get away with being less responsive. So showing up and electing a responsive official is your first step in ensuring that our democracy works for every single New Yorker, which is our goal at Common Cause. And so we've been really privileged to work with legislators over the last couple of years to really help bring New York's elections into the 21st century to the maximum extent possible. Now, you might think that the federal government decides how we vote, but that is not the case. How we actually vote is decided by each individual state. So whether we have early voting, whether we have vote by mail, is controlled by our state legislature. And here in New York City, the city council is able to adopt measures like ranked choice voting, but only for New York City's municipal elections. So in the last 5 years, we've seen really significant changes in how we're able to vote. I mentioned early voting. Early voting is going on right now for Congressional District 3 in Queens and in Long Island, as we talked about, and up in the Bronx in Assembly District 77, where there are approximately 60,000 voters, and very few of them have come out yet to vote. So there's still time to have your voice heard in choosing who is going to represent you and who is going to get to decide how we run our elections. So early voting, the rules around absentee voting, and now we have a full vote by mail in New York State. You don't have to have a reason to get a mail ballot. You can just get online or call the Board of Elections and say, I want to vote by mail. And if you're a registered voter, they will send you your ballot in the mail. And then you're able to fill it out and send it back. Early voting will run through Sunday. And then, of course, Election Day for the special elections is the 13th. So the legislature really decides how you're going to be able to vote, if it's going to be hard for you to vote, if it's going to be easier for you to vote. Making voting more accessible has been what we and all of our partners in Let New York Vote have been working towards. So we were excited to see that for the fourth year in a row, the New York Senate started its legislative session with a democracy package. And it's got 10 different bills, but let me just talk about a few of them that could have a really significant impact. There is a bill that would authorize ballot drop-off boxes. So that means if you did get a mail ballot, you would have a separate drop-off box, not at the Board of Elections, not at your polling place, but at convenient and safe locations where you would be able to drop off your ballot. You wouldn't have to worry, is it going to be handled appropriately by the post office? Will it get there in time? It will already be in the hands of the Board of Elections as soon as you put it in the drop box. There is a bill which would establish an important database so that we're able to track changes in elections at the local level, redistricting maps, how different counties are handling elections, and really allow us to keep an eye on all of the various election authorities to be sure that, again, every eligible voter is able to vote and to have their voice heard. There's an important bill that would help improve our voter rolls, right? Because you can't vote if you're not registered to vote. But if the voter rolls aren't kept up and they're not accurate, when you get to your polling place, you might have a hard time being able to vote, even though you are a registered voter. So that improvement is a really important one. There's a bill that we've been working on at Common Cause New York for a while, and that's a bill that would change our state law to allow organizations like mine and other civically minded organizations or individuals to provide some snacks or a beverage, some water to people who are standing on long lines. Unfortunately, we have seen at busy polling places presidential years that sometimes, because so many people do want to vote, that the lines can stretch for, unfortunately, 2 or 3 hours. Right now, New York law says that we can't give you a cup of coffee. If you step out of line to get water, you might lose your place in that 2-hour line. And so it's harder for voters to make it all the way through to the front of the line. This law would allow us and other civically minded organizations to provide a snack or water to people who are waiting online. New York is one of only 3 states that prohibits helping voters with a snack or a beverage. That just doesn't make any sense in today's world. So we're looking to change that. There are some bills that would deal with campaign finance, particularly a bill that would ensure that campaign contributions are not coming from foreign sources, that the people who are helping candidates run for office are actually American citizens and not foreigners who are trying to influence our elections improperly. And then we at Common Cause have a bill that deals with a situation that has led to the special election in CD3. And that's a bill that would require candidates to provide a statement under penalty of perjury about their background, so that it's clear that the public policy of our state is that candidates have to be honest with the voters and provide an accurate statement about their background. Any of us who've applied for jobs knows that our background and our resume is going to be checked to be sure that it's honest before we get a job offer. So, we, the voters, are employing these people to represent us. We ought to be able to rely on any statements they make about their background so that we know who is actually going to hold this office. So those are only some of the bills that are up for discussion in the legislature. An area that we're starting to see a lot of activity in is dealing with what are called deep fakes. And that is campaign communications that are just not, that depict or sound like something that actually happened that did not actually occur, that have been photoshopped or that have been generated artificially by AI or other technologies, and makes it seem as if a candidate or an elected official said something or did something that they never did. Obviously, that kind of technology can be tremendously misused. And in fact, I had an instance recently in New Hampshire where people got a phone call, a recorded phone call that sounded like it was President Biden talking to them. And the phone call, which came right around the primary in New Hampshire, was a phone call where the person who sounded like Joe Biden was saying, "Oh, don't bother to vote in the primary. Save your energy for the November general election." Well, of course, that was a fake. There is no way that the current president would be telling people not to come out and vote in any election that they're eligible for. So
we have one here too. I'm in Harlem. We had deep fake here with our county chair Keith Wright that's saying something about the current assembly member. Yeah, that was a deep fake as well.
Yeah. So we're seeing a number of bills to try and deal with the situation. We at Common Cause believe that any deep fake that's a campaign communication, written or audio or video, should be labeled to let the voter know this did not occur, and that the depicted individual or organization would be able to take quick action to protect themselves if something deceptive like that was being disseminated. Because frankly, often it's malicious actors who want to confuse the voters, and we need to be sure that the voters are protected. So we want candidates to file statements under penalty of perjury about their background, and we want ads that are not coming from a candidate that make it seem like something was said or something happened that never occurred, that the voters know to be careful that this was not actually real. So a lot of interesting things happening in Albany around how we vote. We've changed a lot of how we vote. We've made it hopefully more accessible to allow people to decide how and when they're going to vote. So really, we've done everything that we can, and we'll be doing even more to encourage people to vote, to make access to the ballot as open and accessible as possible.
Yeah, no, thank you for talking about that deep fake, because that is a serious thing.
It's a very serious thing.
So AI, it is. And it does sound so real. Like so real.
The technology is wonderful, but it can be misused. So, we've got to be alert. And I think it's an obligation of the legislature to really help the voters know that our elections have integrity and that they can trust what they read and see.
So what are the next steps? Because the governor signed these bills, they're not all signed.
So the bills that I mentioned at the beginning are bills that have passed the state Senate. Now they have to pass the Assembly. And then, for instance, the candidate disclosure bill and the bills that the deep fakes are pending. They haven't passed either house. So this is an opportunity for folks who are listening in to have conversations with their assembly member and with their state senator, letting them know what you think is important about how we run our elections, that you want our elections to have integrity, that you want to be confident that the information that's being provided by candidates and about candidates is truthful, because that's important to you. So all too frequently, what we hear from elected representatives is, well, it's only you good government people who talk to us about how elections are being run. You know, Nicole was talking about the minimum wage, and there are a lot of really big issues which the legislature has to address. Housing is a gigantic problem in our city and in our state. Minimum wage, climate crisis that we're facing. But if we don't turn out and elect people who are going to adopt the policies that we believe will solve these problems, the problems aren't going to be solved. So whatever your issue is, I would suggest that how we run our elections and protecting our democracy goes hand in hand with the issues that you care about. If you want a solution that's workable for affordable housing, you've got to elect people who are responsive to your concerns. And you do that by being sure that our elections are well run and that you come out and vote.
Are there any bills right now that we should we at large should be paying attention to, that's coming down the pipe, that's trying to get sponsors, that's trying? Is there anything that you want the listeners and the voters in the state of New York to know about?
I would say it's the deep fake situation. We've got several different possible bills. I'll tell you honestly that I don't feel any of them are strong enough. I just don't think they're enough of a protection for the voters and candidates. So, you know, it's really important to let our elected officials know, don't be afraid to deal with this. Go after it in a strong way. Put a clear disclosure on the communication and allow there to be a strong response. If somebody is lying, if somebody is disseminating false information without letting the voter know that it's made up and not real, then we ought to be able to do something about it quickly.
Thank you so much, Susan. Sorry, you came right in. Right, you came right in on time. I apologize that you had, technical difficulties, but this is what the day and age that we're living in with all of the technology. So we're
Well,
gonna
thank you for the opportunity.
No, absolutely, Susan. I mean, these are, voters tend to wonder. I'll use ranked choice voting for an example. Nicole did touch on it, but some voters woke up and they're like, "What do you mean? What is this? When did this? How did this change?" But and it is, as you stated, only for municipal races. But voters were confused. There was large blocks of voters. In different communities were confused on, why are we doing this? Oh, I thought we were just doing it in 2021. Oh, we're doing this forever. Oh, I didn't know. But so we want to make sure that voters, people at large, but voters, because these are democracy bills, and that voters in general are aware of how they can have access to the ballot. What does it look like to have real access? Like we said at the beginning, some of these bills have been sitting on the desk they've been trying to get passed for decades. I mean, people were talking about Georgia governor imposing the law down there that you couldn't give out water. And I was someplace, and I'm not going to name the name, but I was really surprised that they weren't aware that here in New York, we have that same law.
For decades.
Right, for decades.
Georgia
We were doing it. Right.
Yeah.
We were
Georgia defends their law pointing to New York.
Right.
And say, why are you picking on us in Georgia? You can't do this in New York, and none of you are complaining about that. So what we do here has ramifications across the country. And, I'm very grateful to the Office of the Public Advocate, because Farine, you and, of course, Public Advocate Williams are tremendous sources of information. And one of the things which we do try, our organizations and our partners in government, like the Public Advocate, like the Campaign Finance Board, like actually the Board of Elections. There is information out there. Don't hesitate to do a Google search. Don't hesitate to go to the city website. The Board of Elections has a lot of information. You have to, I think, dig for it a little bit, but it will tell you when the elections are. It allows you to check your registration. And it's a good idea to check your registration because, as I said, the voter rolls need a little fixing. So before you head off to vote, double check. You're registered, figure out where your polling place is. All of this information comes to you in the mail, but it also is available to you online and by phone. So we want to do everything possible to provide you with the information that you need to be an educated voter and to have your voice heard, because that's the essence of democracy. Nobody should choose for you. You should choose for yourself who is going to make the decisions that affect your life, that determine whether we have housing, what our minimum wage is, and how we vote. And we do that by showing up and voting for the best candidate that is closest to what you think needs to be done.
Thank you so much on behalf of myself and the public advocate himself, Public Advocate Williams. We want to thank you for that gracious compliment. So I want to bring back Nicole and Jeff. I want Nicole to share any follow-ups to what you just went through, Susan, and then Jeff, I want you to share how can people reach out to you? I know you have a newsletter or something if you want to share that. So I'll go to Nicole first and then to Jeff, and we can all stay on the screen because then we're going to close it out. Okay. Nicole?
Sure. So two things, and Susan touched on this, earlier about how, the data is public information. So they know what communities are coming out to vote. That's really, why I started Educated Voter, was because I know after working in government and politics for so many years that it's basically like the squeaky wheel gets the oil. That's really, if you know the squeaky wheel gets the oil, that's what this is. And so when you vote, you're saying, I care about who represents me. When you don't vote, you're kind of saying you don't care. You're not paying attention. And so those people who are participating in the process are the ones that are going to get the attention of their elected representatives. Those are the communities that are going to get the attention of their elected representatives. And my goal with Educated Voter is for everybody. Like, we all should be getting attention. And so for us all to get attention, we must all participate in the process. The second thing, and I see that Victor has joined us, and I wanted to make sure that we talk about the rights of the formerly incarcerated. A lot of people think that they have lost their right to vote completely because they were incarcerated. And that is not true. There is only one state right now in the US, and it ain't New York. It is Kentucky. Every other state, after you have completed your time, you may be on parole. There's different iterations. I want to shout out the Brennan Center has a map where you can view the rules for every state on how those who were criminally justice involved can obtain their voting rights again. But please do not believe that you can no longer vote because you were incarcerated in the past. That is not true. And again, that resource is actually on my website. I'm plugging it, educatedvoter.net. Voting resources. The Brennan Center has a map that will give you the information. But please look into your rights to vote. If you were formerly incarcerated, you can vote again in New York.
And I want to add, wait, you shouted out Victor Pace. I got to shout out because part of the coalition.
Always. Victor's an amazing advocate.
Yes. So we want to also shout out, we want to also state that those that are sitting on Rikers Island that have not been sentenced can vote. We are part of our office is part of the coalition, along with Victor Pate, the Brennan Center, Legal Aid Society, Bronx Defenders, and a whole host, League of Women Voters, a whole host of coalition. Even the Civic Engagement Commission is part of it. So to make sure, and the campaign finance board to make sure
Mhm.
that education is being shared to those who are eligible to vote that are currently on Rikers Island, and that they're voting, that they're able to vote by absentee ballot. The coalition goes over every month, to make sure they're registering people to vote. They're completing the absentee ballot. They're bringing the absentee ballots. They're voting by absentee ballot. That's the only way that they are allowed to vote.
And we have a bill in the legislature that would ensure that every single municipality and every single county has to have a program that people who are awaiting trial or who are jailed with misdemeanors, which you can vote even if you're in jail for a misdemeanor, that every jurisdiction has to have a program to ensure that those people who are trapped in the carceral system will have an opportunity to vote. So we're
So
hoping
thank
to
you.
pass that bill through both houses of the legislature and get the governor to sign it.
Yeah, I know the coalition is working hard on that. It's a press conference on Tuesday. So there's a lot happening. Want to hear from Jeff to share. You have information, how people can stay connected to everything that you spoke about locally and nationally, because your newsletter is national. But you go through everything that's happening. So if you want to share that, and we'll put it in a link if you want to verbally say, and how to reach out to you, and we'll drop it in the chat.
Okay, well, I will put my email address in the chat. I've already posted a link to sign up to receive my weekly newsletter. And we have a website link, which I think, Corinne, you're also going to post, which has a lot of information on New York election issues, especially on redistricting. My message to close out the program, I want to thank you all for this program tonight. I want to thank the public advocate. And I want to also call out Nicole for mentioning the census. We've got to keep a lot of balls up in the air, a lot of momentum going. Now, although we are 2 years late in finishing redistricting, that doesn't mean that once the congressional lines are set and done this year, that we are finished. There's going to be a major effort to amend the state constitution yet one more time to try to create an independent process that works, not one that is like a backwards, inside-out Rube Goldberg puzzle, which is what we've seen for the last 2 years. So that is not going to be a one-year effort, but takes 3 years to generally pass a constitutional amendment. Also, the census. Nicole mentioned the census. New York, as I mentioned, lost one congressional district after the 2020 census. We are now looking at the possible loss of 3 congressional districts after 2030. So my goal is to make New Yorkers so acutely aware of the census, not just the 2030 decennial, but all the census products that you need to work with in the years in between. The Census Bureau has a wealth of information, as does the New York City Planning Department, on everything you need to know and probably don't about your communities, your neighborhoods, all the things you need for planning schools and stores and healthcare and parks and senior services. It's all dependent on census data, as our districts, as our funding formulas. The American Community Survey is sent to about a quarter of all households on a rolling basis. That survey provides the backbone of the socioeconomic data the Census Bureau publishes. If you get that survey at home, please take the time to respond to it. There are so many different census programs that you should be aware of before we ramp up for 2030. That I'd like to make the census as every day as morning coffee and Rice Krispies. Mention it every day. So again, thank you all very much for providing the opportunity to meet with you this evening.
Well, thank you. Any closing words, Susan?
No, I think I covered it, which is you have the opportunity to vote. We're going to be with you every step of the way to make voting accessible and equitable for every eligible New Yorker. Take advantage of the information that's available. Go to commoncause.org, sign up for our newsletter, and you'll see the legislative priorities that we're working on to continue to improve our elections here in New York.
Thank you so much. So once again, I want to thank our partners, Common Cause New York, the New York Law School, and Educated Voter. I want to thank Nicole Yearwood, Susan Lerner, and Jeff Weiss. Thank you so much for participating and being a constant partner with our office. A constant partner with our office.
I have to thank the public advocate for not thinking it robbery to, really give attention to civic engagement work. So definitely appreciate the public advocate's office. And Jumani Williams. Yes.
Well, thank you as the civic engagement community organizer. Thank you. So we're going to end, and we thank you. We ran a little over with the technical difficulties. We wanted to make sure that Susan got to share that because it's very important.
Thank you.
So yes, no, not at all. We need to know that information. So thank you all. We're going to end the live stream now. And again, on behalf of the Office of the Public Advocate, Jemani D. Williams, my name is Lorraine Griffith, and I'm the community organizer for Civics and Community Empowerment. Civic engagement is community engagement. Stay connected.